Normandy, June 1944. The Sherman tank is dying. 33 tons of American steel, nose pointed at the sky, belly exposed, engines screaming, trying to claw its way over an earth wall that stood for 1,000 years. Inside, 5 men. The driver sees nothing but blue through his periscope. The gunner's hands freeze on the traverse. The loader stops mid-motion, 75mm shell halfway to the breech, and the commander, standing in the open hatch, sees what's coming. 200 yards away, tree line, a German 75mm anti-tank gun. The Sherman's belly armor is 50mm thick, the thinnest part. The only part that matters right now. The German gunner doesn't hesitate. The round punches through the belly plate like a fist through wet paper, detonates inside the crew compartment, and in 3 seconds, the Sherman transforms from a fighting vehicle into a furnace. The commander tries to bail out. He doesn't make it. This isn't a battle. This is an execution, and it's happening in a place the Allied generals never even considered a battlefield. They called it the bocage. The word bocage doesn't appear in Allied intelligence briefings before D-Day. It's barely mentioned in reconnaissance photos. French resistance fighters try to warn them, but the warnings get lost in translation. The bocage isn't a defensive line. It isn't a fortification. It's 1,000 years of Norman farming compressed into the most efficient killing ground ever designed by accident. For 10 centuries, farmers built walls around their fields. Not stone, earth. 3 feet thick at the base, 10 feet high, crowned with hedges of oak and elm and thorn. Roots intertwined like steel cable. Soil packed harder than concrete. Each field is 50 yards wide, maybe 70, divided by these ancient barriers that run in every direction, creating a maze that stretches for 30 miles inland. From the air, it looks like farmland. From the ground, it's a slaughterhouse. The Germans didn't build the bocage, but they've been studying it since 1940. 4 years to turn every hedgerow into a trench line, every sunken lane into a covered approach, every stone farmhouse into a bunker, every intersection pre-registered for mortar fire. German defenders, veterans from the Eastern Front, know they can't stop the invasion on the beaches. But here? Here, they can bleed it to death. The M4 Sherman was designed for the plains of Europe, for tank-on-tank combat in open terrain, for speed and maneuverability. It was never designed for this. When a Sherman tries to climb a hedgerow, physics becomes the executioner. 33 tons, 400 horsepower. The nose rises. Tracks lose traction. And for 5 seconds, the tank is helpless. Belly armor angled toward whatever's waiting on the other side. 50 millimeters of steel between the crew and oblivion. A German 75mm gun can penetrate Sherman armor at 1,000 yards. The 88mm, the dreaded 88, can do it at 2,000. And they're dug in, camouflaged, waiting. The kill is clinical. Aim for the belly, 1 shot. The round penetrates, detonates inside the crew compartment, and the Sherman brews up, that's the term, like a kettle on a stove. Ammunition cooks off, fuel ignites, and the 5 men inside have about 15 seconds to get out before the metal melts. Most don't make it. Tank crews start calling their Shermans Ronsons after the cigarette lighter. Lights first time, every time. Some crews refuse to button up. They'd rather risk sniper fire than burn alive in a sealed coffin. Others weld scrap metal to the hull, paint prayers to God, lucky symbols. Doesn't help. In the bocage, the Sherman is a slow-moving target in a shooting gallery where the enemy controls every angle. By the end of June, the numbers are obscene. First Army, over 200 tanks lost. Not to German panzers, not to tigers or panthers, to hedgerows, to earth and root, and the simple fact that in this terrain the attacker is always exposed and the defender is always hidden. Infantry casualties climb past 35,000. Entire companies vanish into the bocage and don't come back. Platoons get surrounded, cut off, wiped out within shouting distance of their own lines. Visibility is measured in feet. 50 yards is a long-range engagement. Men fight and die without ever seeing the enemy who killed them. And the heat. God, the heat. June 1944 is one of the hottest summers on record. Inside a Sherman, engine running, gun firing, it's 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Men pass out from heat exhaustion. Ammunition cooks off from temperature alone. When a tank burns, it burns hot enough to melt steel. The bocage doesn't just kill, it swallows. Entire armored columns disappear into the maze and emerge hours later, half-strength, disorganized, traumatized. One American general describes the fighting as, slowly, with weight, a world of closeness, sweat, and death. The Allies control the beaches. They control the sky. They have unlimited supplies, unlimited reinforcements. But they don't control the bocage. And without the bocage, there is no breakout, no advance across France, no end to the war. 7 weeks after D-Day, the Allied beachhead is 11 miles deep. 11 miles, going nowhere. General Omar Bradley stands in a farmhouse near Isigny, staring at a map that mocks him. 5 American divisions, pinned against the coast by hedgerows. He's 51 years old, a farm boy from Missouri who climbed the ranks on competence and patience. And right now, he's watching the greatest invasion in history grind to a halt in a landscape nobody warned him about. The reports keep coming in. Another company bogged down trying to advance 300 yards. Another tank platoon wiped out, crossing a single field. Another battalion requesting artillery for an objective you could walk to in 5 minutes. The British are facing the same nightmare at Caen. Montgomery's offensive, Operation Goodwood, promised a breakthrough. It cost 500 tanks and gained 7 miles. 7 miles in 3 days. Eisenhower visits the front in late June, sees the burned-out Shermans lining the roads like monuments, talks to the crews, the infantry, the junior officers, and he understands. There's no doctrine for this, no training, no equipment designed to fight in terrain where every field is a separate battle, and victory is measured in yards per day. The Allied plan was simple: land on the beaches, break out within a week, race across France, Paris by August, Germany by Christmas. Instead, they're trapped. Trapped in a medieval siege where technology doesn't matter, and numbers don't matter. And all the air power in the world can't dislodge an enemy you can't see from positions you can't reach. Bradley knows what happens if this continues. The stalemate drags into August, September. The German army, battered but not broken, reinforces the line, digs deeper, holds on. And the invasion, the largest amphibious operation in human history, becomes a slow-motion disaster. A grinding war of attrition where the Allies trade blood for dirt, and the corpses pile up faster than the bulldozers can bury them. He looks at the map again. 30 miles of bocage between him and open country. Thousands of hedgerows, thousands of fields, thousands of places to die. Somewhere in that green hell, a 29-year-old sergeant from New Jersey is staring at a burned-out Sherman and having an idea. An idea involving scrap metal from the beaches, a welding torch, and the kind of desperation that only comes from watching good men die for nothing, day after day after day. But Bradley doesn't know that yet. Right now, all he knows is that the bocage is winning. Sergeant Curtis G. Culin III is not a hero. He's a mechanic. 29 years old, Cranford, New Jersey, 102nd Cavalry Reconnaissance Squadron. And right now, 2 a.m., somewhere behind the American lines in Normandy, he's standing in a field workshop that smells like diesel and burnt metal, staring at a problem. The problem is simple. Sherman tanks keep dying in the hedgerows. 5 men per tank, 33 tons of steel turning into a crematorium, because nobody figured out how to get over a wall without exposing the belly. Culin's not an engineer. He's not a scientist. He doesn't have a degree from MIT or a laboratory or a team of experts. What he has is a welding torch, a pile of scrap metal, and 6 weeks of watching good men burn to death for nothing. That's enough. The idea doesn't come from genius. It comes from exhaustion. Culin's been working on tanks since the 102nd landed in Normandy, patching holes, replacing tracks, pulling bodies out of hulls when the fires cool down enough to touch the metal. And every time, every single time, it's the same story. Tank tries to climb a hedgerow, nose goes up, belly gets exposed. German gunner puts a round through the floor. Crew dies screaming. The solution seems obvious. Don't go over the wall. Go through it. But how? Shermans weigh 33 tons. Bocage walls are 3 feet of packed earth and root. You can't just ram through them. The tank bogs down, tracks spin, and you're a stationary target begging to die. Unless, slowly, thinking it through, unless you cut through the base, shear the roots, let the wall collapse while the tank keeps moving. Culin sketches it out on the back of a requisition form. 4 prongs, steel, angled forward like tusks, welded to the hull, sharp enough to bite into earth and root. It's not elegant, it's not sophisticated. It's a battering ram built by a man who's tired of shoveling his friends into body bags. The next problem, steel. You can't just requisition 4 custom-fabricated prongs from the supply depot. There's a war on. Ordnance is for ammunition, fuel, spare parts, not experimental modifications dreamed up by a sergeant who should be sleeping. So Culin does what mechanics do when they need materials. He improvises. Omaha Beach, dawn, July 2nd, 1944. 4 weeks after D-Day, the beach is still littered with debris, wrecked landing craft, abandoned equipment, and thousands of German anti-tank obstacles. Czech hedgehogs, 3 steel beams welded into an X shape, designed by Wehrmacht engineers to stop Allied armor on the sand. Planted by the thousands across every invasion beach from Cherbourg to Caen. They didn't work. The Allies came anyway, blew gaps through the obstacles, drove over them, left them half buried in the surf like the wreckage of a failed prophecy. And now? Now Sergeant Cullen's going to turn them into the weapon that breaks the bocage. He stands on the beach, boots in the wet sand, wind off the channel, looking at a hedgehog jutting from the tide line. Rusted steel, angle beams, each one about 6 feet long, 3 inches thick. Perfect. He signals to his crew. 2 privates with cutting torches, a truck waiting on the road. They work fast. Cut the hedgehog apart at the welds, load the beams onto the truck, drive inland. By noon, they've collected enough steel for 20 prototypes. By sunset, Culin's back in the workshop. And by midnight, the sparks start flying. The arc welder sounds like a scream. Blue-white light, molten metal, the smell of ozone and burning flux. Culin works in short bursts, 5 seconds of welding, 10 seconds to let the steel cool, then another burst. He's building the first prong, 6 feet long, angled at 45 degrees, sharpened to a wedge at the tip. The steel from the Czech hedgehog is thick, Wehrmacht quality, designed to stop tanks, which means it'll cut through bocage roots like a knife through rope. The irony isn't lost on him. This steel, this exact piece of metal, was placed on Omaha Beach to kill Americans, to stop the invasion, to turn the sand into a graveyard. Instead, with dark satisfaction, it's about to become the tool that wins the war. 4 prongs, welded to a crossbar, mounted on a Sherman's hull. Each prong made from enemy steel, salvaged from the beaches where 5,000 men died on June 6th. Culin welds through the night. Sparks shower onto the dirt floor. His hands blister inside the gloves. Eyes ache from the arc light. But he doesn't stop. Because somewhere out there, right now in the darkness, another Sherman's trying to climb another hedgerow. And another crew's about to die. Because nobody's fixed the problem yet. He welds faster. By dawn, the device is finished. 4 steel tusks, bolted and welded to a mounting frame. Crude, heavy, brutal-looking. Culin steps back, looks at it. It's ugly. But ugly doesn't matter. Function matters. And this thing, this improvised battering ram built from enemy scrap, should work. Should. He requisitions a Sherman from the motor pool. Tells the crew chief he needs it for field testing. Doesn't explain what that means. The device gets mounted. 4 privates with wrenches and welding rigs. Takes them 6 hours to bolt the frame to the hull and reinforce the welds. When they're done, the Sherman looks like a medieval war machine. Steel tusks jutting from its nose, like something a Viking would build if you gave him 30 tons of modern armor. The motor pool sergeant stares at it. The hell is that? Culin lights a cigarette, doesn't answer immediately, just looks at the tank, his tank now, and thinks about the hundreds of Shermans burning in hedgerows across Normandy. It's a hedge cutter. Does it work? We're about to find out. Word spreads fast. By noon, half the 102nd knows that Sergeant Cullen's built some kind of contraption for breaking through hedgerows. By evening, officers start showing up at the workshop. Captains, majors, a full colonel from division headquarters. They all say the same thing. We've tried everything. Explosives, bulldozers, modified plows. Nothing works. Culin doesn't argue. He just shows them the device. The reactions are predictable. Some laugh. Some look skeptical. One captain, a West Point graduate with 3 years of engineering training, explains in excruciating detail why it won't work. The angle's wrong. The steel's too thin. The mounting frame will shear off under stress. Culin listens, nods, doesn't interrupt. When the captain's done, Culin says, quietly, with absolute confidence, "It'll work." How do you know? Because it has to. The officers leave. Most think he's wasting time. A few think he's insane. One, a lieutenant named Morrison, who lost his entire platoon in a hedgerow ambush 2 weeks ago, stays behind. "You really think this'll save lives?" Culin looks at the device, at the steel tusks salvaged from German beach obstacles, at the Sherman waiting to test them. "I think men are dying because nobody's fixed a problem that's been killing them for 6 weeks. I think if this works, we stop losing 5 guys every time a tank tries to cross a field. And I think I'm tired of pulling bodies out of burned-out hulls." Morrison doesn't say anything for a long moment. Then, "When are you testing it?" "Tomorrow, 0700. There's a hedgerow 2 miles south. Good kill zone. Germans use it for ambushes." "I'll be there." "Bring a camera. If this works, somebody needs to show it to Bradley." That night, Culin doesn't sleep. He sits in the workshop, smoking cigarettes, staring at the device mounted on the Sherman's hull. It should work. The math's simple. The engineering's sound. 4 steel prongs cut into the base of a hedgerow, shear the roots, collapse the wall, tank drives through. Easy, but should doesn't mean will. And if it doesn't work, if the device fails, if the tank bogs down, if the Germans are waiting on the other side, he's just killed 5 more men testing a theory. The weight of that sits on him like a stone. Outside, the war continues. Distant artillery, the rumble of trucks on the road. Somewhere in the darkness, another Sherman's burning. Culin finishes his cigarette, walks to the tank, puts his hand on the cold steel of the tusks. German steel, salvaged from the beaches, turned into a weapon against the men who built it. If there's poetry in that. He's too tired to appreciate it. Tomorrow they test it, at either the bocage breaks or Culin does. July 14th, 1944. General Omar Bradley's Jeep rolls into the 2nd Armored Division staging area near Colombier. Engine off, dust settling, and every officer in the sector knows something's about to happen. When the 1st Army commander shows up unannounced with his entire staff, it's either a court-martial or a miracle. Right now, Bradley's hoping for a miracle. He's already seen one hedgerow demonstration, a device called the salad fork. Timber prongs bolted to a Sherman's nose. It worked. Sort of. Required explosives, precise timing, and a crew willing to drive at a wall with 500 pounds of TNT strapped to their bumper. Bradley wasn't impressed. But this one's different. This one's from a sergeant in the 102nd Cavalry, a mechanic, not an engineer, not a West Point graduate with a degree in physics, a mechanic who's been welding scrap metal in a field workshop for 2 weeks. The device is waiting. 4 steel prongs, sharpened, angled, welded to a crossbar mounted on a Sherman's hull. It looks medieval, brutal, like something you'd build to break down a castle gate. Bradley steps out of the Jeep, looks at the contraption. His face doesn't change. Will it work? Sergeant Culin, 29 years old, hands still blistered from welding, doesn't make promises. He just nods toward the hedgerow. "One way to find out, sir." The hedgerow stands 50 yards away, 10 feet high, 3 feet thick, roots like steel cable, earth packed harder than concrete. The same type of wall that's been killing American tankers for 6 weeks. Bradley stands 20 yards back, staff officers behind him, notebooks out, stopwatches ready. Major General Giroux's there, ordnance officers, tank commanders, engineers, everyone who's been losing sleep trying to solve the bocage problem. And they're all watching one sergeant, one modified Sherman, one absurd idea involving enemy scrap metal. The Sherman's engine roars to life, 33 tons of steel, 400 horsepower, and bolted to its nose, 4 tusks salvaged from the German beach obstacles that were supposed to stop the invasion 2 months ago. The irony's not lost on anyone. Culin's inside, driver's seat, hands on the controls, heart hammering in his chest, because if this doesn't work, if the device fails, if the tank bogs down, if the prongs snap off, he's just embarrassed himself in front of the man commanding 5 divisions. But if it works, the war changes. He releases the brake. The Sherman moves forward, not fast, not slow, 10 miles per hour, steady, inevitable. The steel prongs hit the base of the hedgerow, and instead of climbing, instead of tilting the belly armor toward the sky like every other Sherman in Normandy, the tusks bite into earth and root. The engine growls, the tracks churn, soil explodes outward, roots snap like gunfire. And the Sherman doesn't go over the wall, it goes through it. The ancient barrier, 1,000 years of Norman farming, 10 feet of earth and root and thorn, just tears apart, like paper, like it was never there. 2 minutes, 30 seconds. That's how long it takes. And then the Sherman's on the other side. In the field, hull level, belly protected, crew safe, ready to fight. Bradley doesn't move. He just stares. Because he's just watched a mechanic from New Jersey solve a problem that's baffled an entire army with scrap metal and a welding torch. Someone behind him, one of the staff officers, breaks the silence. Jesus Christ! Bradley keeps staring. At the gap in the hedgerow, at the Sherman sitting calmly in the field beyond, at the torn earth and shattered roots scattered like debris from an explosion. And then, slowly, he starts laughing. Not because it's funny, but because it's so absurdly simple, so obvious in hindsight. And nobody, not the engineers, not the armor experts, not the strategic planners, nobody thought of it. A sergeant did, with enemy steel from a beach. The order, 6:30. Bradley stops laughing, turns to Lieutenant Colonel Medeiros, Chief of Ordnance, 1st Army. The laughter's gone. The face is stone. How many can you build? Medeiros blinks. Sir? How many of these devices can you build before we jump off? Operation Cobra's in 11 days, sir. I didn't ask what you need. I asked how many you can build. Medeiros does the math in his head. Every field workshop, every maintenance depot, every welder in 1st Army working round the clock. 500, maybe, if we push it. Bradley nods, once, sharp. Then push it. I want 500 of these on Sherman hulls before July 25th. I don't care if your welders sleep. I don't care if you have to fly equipment in from England. I want every tank in the breakthrough force equipped with this device. Yes, sir. And Colonel? Sir? If this works, if we break through the bocage because of this, I'm recommending the sergeant for a Legion of Merit. Bradley looks at Culin, standing next to the Sherman, covered in grease and weld burns. Probably hasn't slept in 2 days. What's your name, Sergeant? Culin, sir. Curtis G. Culin. Well, Sergeant Culin, you just saved the invasion. That evening, 8 p.m., a C-47 transport plane lifts off from a dirt airstrip in Normandy. Destination, England. Mission, collect every arc welder, every cutting torch, every piece of welding equipment the 8th Air Force can spare. The plane lands back in France before breakfast. By dawn on July 15th, the order's out. Every field workshop, every maintenance depot, every tank unit with a welder. You're building hedgerow cutters, 24 hours a day, no breaks, no days off, just steel and sparks, and the clock ticking down to Operation Cobra. The raw material? The beaches, Omaha, Utah, Gold, Juneau, Sword, still littered with German anti-tank obstacles, thousands of them. Czech hedgehogs, steel I-beams, angle iron. Rommel's underwater defenses, now scrap metal for the taking. American engineers swarm the beaches with cutting torches, slice the obstacles apart at the welds, load the steel onto trucks, deliver it inland to the workshops. One sergeant jokes that they're finally winning the Battle of Omaha Beach. 2 months late, but winning. The workshops turn into forges. Sparks fly 24 hours a day. The smell of molten metal and ozone hangs in the air like smoke. Welders work in shifts, 4 hours on, 2 hours off, then back to the torch. Each device is custom built, hand fabricated, no two exactly alike. Some prongs are perfectly angled, others are rough, improvised. But they all do the same thing. They cut through hedgerows. The quality depends on the welder's skill, on the steel's condition, on how much time they have before the next tank rolls in for modification. Some welders are artists, precise, methodical. Their devices look like factory-issue equipment. Others are butchers, fast, brutal. Their devices look like they were built in a cave with a hammer. Doesn't matter. As long as it cuts, it works. July 16th, 17, 18. The numbers climb. 50 devices built. 100. 200. Tank crews watch the modifications with something like religious awe, because they know what this means. It means they're not helpless anymore. It means they can go through the walls instead of over them. It means the bocage's reign of terror is ending. July 22nd. 3 days until Operation Cobra. 450 devices completed. 2nd Armored Division, 75% equipped. They're the spearhead, the breakthrough force, and they're going to hit the German lines with a capability the Wehrmacht's never seen. 3rd Armored, 25%. They got their devices last minute, but it's enough. July 24th. 1 day left. 518 Rhino tanks, 60% of Bradley's armor. In 10 days, American welders built more than 500 war-winning weapons using enemy steel from a beach. July 24th, night. The workshops go quiet. Exhausted welders collapse next to their equipment. Uniforms burned with spark holes, hands blistered, eyes red from smoke and sleepless nights. They're done. Across the American front, Sherman tanks with steel tusks sit in assembly areas, engines cold, crews sleeping in foxholes. Tomorrow they're going to punch through 30 miles of bocage in a single offensive, the kind of advance that's taken 7 weeks to achieve so far. If it works, the Allies break out of Normandy, race across France, end the war by Christmas. If it fails, the stalemate continues. Sergeant Cullin's with his unit, 102nd Cavalry. He's not riding in a Rhino tomorrow. He's in a reconnaissance vehicle, scouting ahead. He doesn't know that in 4 months, a German landmine will take his leg in the Hürtgen forest. He doesn't know that history will remember the device, but forget his name. Right now, all he knows is that he fixed a problem. That's what mechanics do. They see something broken, something wasteful, something killing good men, and they fix it. Tomorrow the world finds out if a sergeant from New Jersey just changed the course of the war, with scrap metal from a beach, and 10 days of round-the-clock welding. The Rhino tanks are ready. The question is the bocage ready for them? July 25th, 1944, 9:38 a.m. The sky over Normandy turns black, not with clouds, with aircraft. 1,500 B-17 heavy bombers, 380 medium bombers, 559 fighter bombers, all converging on a rectangle of Norman farmland 5 miles wide, 2 miles deep. The target? Panzer Lehr Division, Wehrmacht Elite, dug into the bocage south of Saint-Lô. The mission? Annihilation. The first wave drops at 9:40 a.m. High explosive, fragmentation, incendiary. 3,300 tons of bombs in 90 minutes. The ground doesn't shake, it liquefies. Hedgerows that stood for 1,000 years simply cease to exist. German strongpoints vanish in eruptions of earth and fire. Foxholes collapse, bunkers implode. Men are buried alive or vaporized, or driven insane by concussion. Generalleutnant Fritz Behrlein, Panzer Lehr's commander, will later report that 70% of his division is dead, wounded, or in shock before a single American tank crosses the line. But the bombing is just the opener. What comes next is something the Germans have never seen. The 11 a.m., the bombardment lifts. Smoke and dust hang over the battlefield like fog, and through that fog, the Rhinos roll forward. 2nd Armored Division, 4th Infantry, 9th Infantry. Over 300 Sherman tanks with steel tusks welded to their hulls. And they're not advancing on the roads anymore. They're going straight through the bocage. The lead Sherman, Lieutenant Robert Wolfe commanding, approaches the first hedgerow, 10 feet high, 3 feet thick, roots like cable. The same type of wall that's been killing Americans for 7 weeks. The Rhino's prongs hit the base, the engine roars, and the wall tears apart. Soil explodes outward, roots snap like gunfire, and the Sherman bursts through into the field beyond. Hull level, belly protected, crew safe. Behind Wolfe, 20 more Rhinos punch through 20 more hedgerows, and behind them, infantry pours through the gaps. No more climbing, no more exposed bellies, no more watching tanks die trying to claw over walls. The Americans are finally mobile. And the Germans are learning what it's like to be buried alive. Here's what nobody planned for. When a rhino cuts through the base of a hedgerow, when steel prongs shear through centuries of root and earth, the entire wall collapses. Tons of soil, stone, shattered timber, coming down like an avalanche. And if there's a German machine gun position at the base, if there's a mortar team dug in, a sniper nest, an infantry squad waiting in ambush, they don't have time to run. The earth comes down on them, buries foxholes, collapses dugouts, crushes men who thought they were safe behind 1,000 years of construction. It's not quick. It's suffocation, slow, mechanical. The weight of the bocage itself turned into a weapon against the men who used it so well for 2 months. American infantry advancing behind the Rhinos find German positions half buried, helmets sticking out of the dirt, rifles jutting from collapsed walls, hands clawing at soil. Some defenders are unconscious from shock. Others are digging themselves out, frantic, choking, eyes wide with terror. A few are just gone, entombed under tons of earth that came down too fast to escape. This isn't armored warfare. This is industrial burial. The bocage weaponized against its own defenders. By noon, First Army's advanced 3 miles. 3 miles in 3 hours. The kind of progress that took 6 weeks to achieve in June. By nightfall, 7 miles. Panzer layers shattered. German 7th Army sending frantic reports to headquarters describing American tanks that drive through solid earth, that ignore hedgerows as if they don't exist, that appear in fields the Wehrmacht thought were impossible to reach. There's no doctrine for this. No defense against an enemy that can bypass your prepared positions by cutting through the walls you built them behind. German infantry units that held for weeks break and retreat. Not because they're cowards, but because there's no point holding a position when the enemy can appear behind you by driving through the wall at your back. Tank commanders who survived Kursk, who fought at Kharkov, report they've never seen anything like this. Never seen terrain advantage evaporate so completely, so suddenly. The bocage is no longer a fortress, it's a graveyard. July 26th, 27th, 28th. Operation Cobra doesn't just succeed. It shatters the German defensive line so completely that within a week, Patton's Third Army is racing across open country toward Brittany. The stalemate is over, the siege is broken, and the Rhino Tank, 500 devices built in 10 days by exhausted welders using enemy scrap metal, is part of why. Not the only reason, The bombing mattered. 3,000 tons of high explosive obliterated Panzer Lehr before the ground attack even started. The artillery mattered. 170,000 shells fired in support. The British mattered. Their operations at Caen drew German armor away from the American sector. And the Germans were exhausted, undersupplied, fighting a war they couldn't win. But the Rhino gave American armor the one thing it needed most: mobility. The ability to move through the bocage instead of dying in it. The ability to exploit gaps, flank positions, break through instead of battering against walls for weeks. It didn't win the war, but it ended the nightmare. Tank crews who spent June and July watching their friends burn can now drive through hedgerows without exposing their bellies to German guns. Infantry who spent 2 months fighting for 50-yard gains can now advance hundreds of yards behind armored spearheads. And sergeants like Curtis Culin, the mechanic from Cranford, New Jersey, get their names in field reports, commendations, newspaper articles back home. Cullen's awarded the Legion of Merit. Eisenhower sends a personal telegram. Bradley mentions him in dispatches. For a brief moment, he's famous. The sergeant who saved the invasion with a welding torch and German scrap metal. But fame doesn't last in war. And the man who solved the bocage problem, the man who saved thousands of lives, is about to discover that surviving one nightmare doesn't mean you're safe from the next. August bleeds into September, September into October. The Rhino tanks keep rolling across France, into Belgium, toward Germany itself. Some break down, some are destroyed. Some are simply abandoned when their units get new equipment. But they did their job. They broke the bocage. And now the war moves on. Sergeant Culin moves on too. With the 102nd Cavalry, reconnaissance missions, forward scouting, probing enemy positions, the dangerous work that doesn't make headlines but wins battles. And in November, cold, wet, miserable November, his unit enters a forest along the German border, a place the maps call Hurtgenwald. The Americans call it something else. The Hurtgen Forest, where 75,000 casualties are waiting in the trees, where the terrain's worse than Normandy, where visibility's measured in feet and the Germans are dug in so deep they're fighting from bunkers built into the roots of ancient oaks. November 2nd, 1944. Cullen's on patrol, dismounted, moving through underbrush so thick you can't see 10 yards ahead. His boot comes down on something that clicks. Anti-personnel mine. The explosion is small, efficient, German engineering. It doesn't kill him. It shatters his left leg below the knee, destroys his right thigh, and detonates a second mine when he falls. His squad mate, Private William Bateman, also from Cranford, uses his belt as a tourniquet, saves Cullen's life, then loses his own left leg going for help. Cullen survives. They amputate the left leg in a field hospital, patch the right as best they can, ship him to England, then home. Discharged September 1945. He marries a woman named Bernice, works as a salesman in New York City, divorces in the 50s, lives quietly, and dies November 20th, 1963, Greenwich Village, age 48. The obituary runs in the New York Times 2 days later. 4 paragraphs. most of it about the Rhino Tank. Eisenhower sends a telegram to his parents. The nation owes him a debt it can never repay. But by then, the bocage is ancient history. The Rhino tanks are museum pieces, and Culin is just another veteran who came home broken and died too young. The device lived on. The inventor did not. The Hurtgen Forest doesn't care about heroes. It doesn't care that Sergeant Curtis Culin saved the Normandy invasion. Doesn't care that his device broke the bocage. Doesn't care that 500 Rhino tanks punched through the German line because of a mechanic with a welding torch. War doesn't remember favors. It collects debts. November 2nd, 1944. Cold rain. Dense fog. Trees so thick the light barely penetrates. Cullen's on foot patrol with the 102nd Cavalry. Somewhere near the German border. Exactly where doesn't matter, because every part of the Hurtgen looks the same. Dark, claustrophobic, lethal. His boot comes down on a pressure plate. Click. The S-mine, bouncing Betty in American slang, launches 3 feet into the air before detonating. 360 steel balls in a sphere, designed to shred everything at waist height. Cullen's left leg shatters below the knee. The right thigh opens like torn fabric. He goes down. Hits another mine as he falls, this one smaller, anti-personnel. But at point-blank range, it doesn't need to be big. Private William Bateman, 22 years old, also from Cranford, New Jersey, tears off his belt, uses it as a tourniquet on Cullen's left leg, keeps him from bleeding out in the mud. Then Bateman runs for the medics, steps on a third mine, loses his own left leg. 2 men from the same town, both crippled in the same forest on the same day. War's sense of irony is impeccable. The hospital, 3 o'clock. They take Cullen's left leg in a field hospital. No choice. The bones pulverized, arteries destroyed, tissue too damaged to save. The saw goes through just below the knee. Clean cut. Efficient. German minds, American surgery. Both very good at what they do. They save the right leg, barely. Months of reconstruction, metal pins, skin grafts. He'll walk again, they say, with a prosthetic, with a cane. He'll walk, just not the same. Culin spends the winter in a hospital in England, then stateside. Walter Reed. Rehabilitation. Learning to balance on one leg and a piece of carved wood. The war ends while he's relearning how to stand. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe. He's in a hospital bed in Washington, watching other patients celebrate, listening to the cheers from outside. The invasion he saved succeeded. The war he helped win is over. And he's 29 years old, with one leg and a drawer full of painkillers. September 1945. Discharge papers. Honorable. Purple Heart. Legion of Merit. A citation signed by Eisenhower himself. Curtis Culin goes home to Cranford, New Jersey, 215 Holly Street, his parents' house. The town throws a parade. Small, modest. American flags, a high school band. The mayor gives a speech about heroism and sacrifice. Culin stands on a wooden leg and smiles for the cameras. Inside, he feels nothing. The newspapers run stories. Local hero invents war-winning device. Photos of the Rhino tank. Diagrams of the cutting prongs. Quotes from Bradley about how the bocage would have killed the invasion without Culin's ingenuity. For a few weeks, he's famous. Then the stories stop. The photographers leave, and Culin's just another veteran with a limp and nightmares he doesn't talk about. He marries a woman named Bernice Enright, 1946. Gets a job as a salesman, Shenley Industries. Sells liquor to distributors in New York City. The work's fine, the pay's adequate. The wooden leg aches in winter. He doesn't talk about the war, doesn't mention the rhino. When people ask, and they do occasionally, he changes the subject. The marriage falls apart in the early 50s. No drama, just two people who stop recognizing each other. Divorce, quiet, final. Culin moves to Greenwich Village, small apartment. Lives alone, works, drinks, sleeps when the leg stops hurting long enough. No interviews, no reunions, no speeches at veterans' halls. He fixed a problem once, saved some lives. The army gave him a medal, and the war took his leg. The accounts settled. November 20th, 1963. Curtis Grubb Culin III dies in his apartment in Greenwich Village, age 48. Heart failure, the coroner says. Probably related to wartime injuries, stress, chronic pain, the slow grinding down that happens to men who survive battles but don't survive the peace. The New York Times runs an obituary. November 22nd. 4 paragraphs. Inventor of the Rhino Tank device dies at 48. Most of it's about the hedgerow cutter, about Operation Cobra, about how a sergeant from New Jersey saved the Normandy invasion with scrap metal and a welding torch. One sentence about his post-war life. He worked as a salesman in New York. That's it. That's all. Eisenhower, retired now, 2 years from death himself, sends a telegram to Culin's parents. The nation owes him a debt it can never repay. The funeral's small, family, a few old army buddies, a representative from the VFW. They bury him at Fairview Cemetery in Westfield, New Jersey. Military honors, flag on the coffin, 3 volleys, taps, and then the grave fills in, and Curtis Culin disappears into history. Here's what they don't tell you about war heroes. They don't live forever. They don't ride off into sunsets. They come home broken, if they come home at all, and spend the rest of their lives trying to forget things they can't unsee. Curtis Culin saved thousands of lives, maybe tens of thousands. His device broke the bocage, ended the stalemate, turned the Normandy invasion from a potential disaster into the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany. And his reward? A wooden leg, a failed marriage, 48 years of life instead of 80. The Rhino Tank's in museums now. The Patton Museum, the National World War II Museum. Historians write papers about it. Documentaries feature it. But nobody remembers the mechanic. June 6, 1944. The largest invasion in human history. 5,000 ships, 11,000 aircraft, 156,000 men hitting 5 beaches in a single day. Planned for years, executed with precision, supported by the combined industrial might of the Allied powers. And 7 weeks later, it was failing. Trapped in a maze of hedgerows, bleeding out in fields that nobody thought mattered. The invasion was saved by a mechanic from New Jersey with a welding torch and scrap metal from a beach. steel that was supposed to kill Americans, turned into the weapon that broke the German line. That's the truth of it, not the grand strategy, not the brilliant generals, not the overwhelming firepower. The invasion was saved by one man who got tired of watching his friends burn. And that man died alone in a Greenwich Village apartment at 48. Crippled, forgotten, buried in a grave that gets fewer visitors every year. War doesn't care about fairness. It doesn't reward genius or punish cowardice in equal measure. It just takes. And it took Curtis Cullin's leg in a forest in Germany. And 20 years later, it took the rest of him. The rhino lived on. The inventor did not. If this story hit you the way it was meant to, if you felt the weight of the bocage, the terror of the burning Shermans, and the tragic irony of Curtis Cullin's fate, then do one thing for us. Subscribe. We don't do clickbait. We don't do fluff. We tell the stories that history forgot. The mechanics, the welders, the men who saved armies and died forgotten. Hit the like button if you want more stories like this. Real war, real people, real consequences. And turn on notifications, because next week we're diving into another piece of forgotten genius that changed the course of World War II. The algorithm doesn't care about 75-minute documentaries, but you do. So subscribe, like, share. Let's make sure Curtis Cullin's name doesn't disappear completely. He deserves that much. Iron witness. The truth rusts slower than steel.